Rabbi Howard Bogot, Howie, as I've known him since I was probably age 8, is my close friend and buddy. Uh, I don't know whether you're my spiritual mentor, but perhaps that's underlying all this. But uh, we have today a terrific person, a real Mensch, as we say in Yiddish, with us to talk about we're going to talk about a variety of things. We're not sure quite where we're going to end up, but this podcast is called Economics Matters, the podcast, but we're not going to talk necessarily directly about economics, but I imagine we're going to end up bringing some economics into it because I have that capacity to try and make anything that's not economics economics. Howie, welcome to the podcast. It's great to be back with you. Why don't you explain how we met?
We met, I can't remember the exact year, but we met when you were a camper at the Joseph and Betty Harlem, spelled with two A's, Harlem Camp, near Cresneyville, Pennsylvania. I'm going to say was in the late 60s. Does that sound right to you?
Maybe mid 60s, early 60s, yeah.
Yeah, I would say so.
Early 60s, yeah.
And I was the educational program director, and you were there. Your sister Barbara was there. I don't think Michael was there.
Yeah, Michael was there too. Yeah, he was
Was
there.
he there too?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to picture. I mean, it's a long time ago. The director of the camp, his name was Mensch, and you used the word Mensch just a while ago. And he was just a fantastic human being. Uh, and we all became very close to him. He wasn't your typical um, camp director. He was just very, very much remember, he would get on the loudspeaker and say longs and shorts, which meant you should wear a long sleeve shirt and short pants, depending on what the climate was for that day. I can just remember, I can hear him saying that. He was a very, very just wonderful human being, uh, very principled, really wanted, when you walk down the camp, he always said, look down, see if there's a piece of paper to pick up. You remember that?
Yeah, no, he was something. He was like a top athlete at Penn, one of the first Jews to be
Basketball.
accepted.
I think it was basketball.
But
Does
yeah,
that does that sound right?
basketball or baseball, but he had arms like they were seemed like a diameter of a foot. And even in his 60s, he was hitting baseballs. Well, so he was a big deal in Philadelphia when uh, he everybody knew Mensch Goldblatt. And so I met you in camp, and then uh, I was kind of interacting with. Went to camp right through becoming a waiter, and then I ran the kitchen for summer, and then I became like a program director and ran programs. And on weekends from college, I would go up on weekends to make some money to supervise, be like the camp representative. This was even after Menchie had retired and gone to California. And then I went to UCLA after grad school, and I decided I would look around for Menchie Goldblatt, and I found Menchie Goldblatt lived not too far from where I lived. So I went down there with my 1951 Dodge Carnet convertible that I'd purchased, and he and his buddy and I used to hang out. We'd had a great time, and then he came to my wedding in I guess this was 84, and so we stayed in close touch the whole way. And then with you, I've been in touch with you probably, what is it, 60 years. After you were living in Cherry Hill for a period of time uh, in the non-camp season, and I would come over and sit at your knee and hit you with questions, and you would sound very erudite and say philosophical things. And it wasn't really too much about religion per se, but We used to talk a lot, so you made a big impact on me.
I'm
But
sorry.
what?
No, I'm sorry that I caused your brain to be in constant motion, but look, it paid off.
Well, thank you for the compliment. But let me just introduce Rabbi Bogot more formally. He has a BS from in education from Lewis University in Evanston, Illinois. He has a BHL. That's I'm not quite. Sounds like a bachelor's degree from Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati. Then he got a master's from the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, and then he got a master's of education at the University of Cincinnati. Then he got a graduate certificate in social work from Hunter College in New York City. Then he got a DD, Hebrew Union College Jewish. I think this is a doctor of divinity. This is when he becomes a rabbi again at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. So what we have here is somebody who's been involved with education his entire life, but it's about. Let me just read you what his statement is about his research work. His research is primarily, according to Howie here, and I call him Howie because I can't call him anything else. My research is primarily devoted to the concept of kedusha, which is uniqueness. That's the kedusha is the Hebrew word for uniqueness. So it's uniqueness in biblical, early Judaism, and rabbinic texts, classical and modern. These interests focus on the perennial values that inform Jewish identity development, as well as the various God ideas that reflect these core principles. I also explore the ways in which these core values, as expressed in classical Jewish texts, can and should help clarify contemporary issues that are experienced by students as they negotiate cultural and religious diversity. So, Howie, why don't we do this? Why don't we have you tell us how you went, where you grew up, and how you decided to get into first to get a BS in education, and then to go to Hebrew Union College to get another undergraduate degree, and then to get a master's degree at the same place, and then get a master's of education, and then become a social worker, and then finally become a rabbi. How does all this happen?
Okay,
And
well, I didn't get.
let
I
me just
didn't get.
say, here's the economics part, which is that you're finding your career by trying different things as a young person, which is what most young people do. The typical job lasts maybe 5 months, 6 months when you're like in your 20s and earlier, before 25. Like job searching is the standard, and it's a good thing because people don't know where they're going until they go, and then they find out they don't want to be there and they try something else.
Well, I have to. I'll have to tell you that I didn't really try jobs. I tried. I moved through different structures of thought and creative thinking. Uh, I mean, one of my jobs. I was born in Chicago, and but raised in Oak Park, Illinois, which is just west of the city, and was a student at Oak Park River Forest High School, and that's where I learned to. Uh, I had an English teacher that taught me to really love creative writing, especially poetry. So all the children's books that I wrote, with yes, I'd say all of them, and with the
Let me
exception of
just
the
say
one book,
you've written over 20 books, right?
and most of them are in rhyme. In other words, because children love rhyme and they remember things with rhyme, and so most of the texts of these books for very young children are in rhyme. There's one or two books, even the most recent book about a hermit crab that teaches people how to repair the world is also in rhyme.
What's
The only
the name
book
of
that,
that book? That's the most recent book.
well, that's the most. That book was self-published, called Never Tell a, this is what it looks like.
Never tell a hermit crab we can't repair the world. So Howie's a fantastic writer. He wrote one thing that we use in my family for many years was your Haggadah.
Right. Well, that's still in print. By the way, this book, what's really special about this book is that the introduction is by Madeline Dean, the congresswoman who was one of the leaders of the what do you call it process, the one that went twice for a former president.
Okay.
Nevertheless, that's where the love for writing and poetry came. It came during high school, and the name Gilman, John Gilman, was the name of the teacher, and then the jobs that I had. All of these things, Larry, actually influenced my persona. They didn't end up to be separate jobs, and I'll mention that more clearly in just a minute. But my jobs included working for the Oak Park River Forest recreation centers, and I used to I worked with very severely intellectually challenged young adults, and I have to say that experience, I almost entered that field. In fact, the state of Illinois was going to give me some kind of special attention to take the necessary courses to certify me in working with severely intellectually challenged young adults. Emotionally, I found that it was so draining. These were the days when there were still lobotomies, I think is the term that was used to be curative for some of these young adults. But I, who can't really do a wall step worth a damn, I would run dances for them, and I opened up a sheltered workshop so they could make a little money. I taught them how to ride the bus and would have to yell at people on the bus who were making fun of them. But that was an experience that deepened me and sensitized me. And when I finally then ended up as the director of religious education for the liberal movement of Reform Judaism in North America, the first program that I initiated was to certify congregations to deal with folks who had special needs, both in terms of their programs and the way the services were conducted, so that wheelchairs could get up ramps and there would be elevators that could be used. And that all really started with when I was in college, working my way through college and on the playgrounds, creating this program for these folks. And at the same time, I also played Santa Claus, because I was very much a butterball in those days. Lost weight as I got into my more aged period of life, but I played Santa Claus. And at the same time, I was teaching Hebrew school. So I'd have a student who was in Hebrew school climb up on my lap. And, I'd say, "So what do you want for Hanukkah?" And the kid would almost fall off my lap. How does Santa Claus know anything about Hanukkah? How does Santa Claus know that I'd respond to it? But those all happened while I was working my way through college. And then toward the end of my college careers at Lewis, what is now Lewis University, it used to be called National College of Education, because I was very interested in early childhood. And the truth is to this day, no matter what adult education situations I'm in, including my current lecturing in Jewish studies at Penn State in the Abington campus, which is close by where I live. What I learned about early childhood, you just pump it up a little bit and you're teaching adults the basic theories of education and the concern for very young children to feel a sense of success and feel a sense of awe in the learning of new ideas. It's no different for adults. It's just, you just kind of bump it up a little bit in terms of the content. But it was during that time of toward the end of my working on my first degree, which was the Bachelor of Science in Education, that I started to do some interfaith work with ADL. And there was then a National Conference of Christians and Jews. I don't think that organization exists any longer. And I did some
explain what ADL means, because
the Anti-Defamation League is well, it's become much more, shall I say, an organization that's concerned with hate on every level, no matter whether it's hate against Jews or hate against people of color or whatever the situation may be. The ADL is a watchdog organization to work. I don't know if they work hand in glove with the ACLU or not, but the principle of sustaining our democracy and looking for inclusion amidst diversity is definitely the commitment of the ADL. The ADL, however, in the earliest years that I experienced the ADL, it was designed to run programs with non-Jewish groups, church groups, so that there were panel discussions that I participated in. And that's where, with that and the working as a counselor for a short period of time at a Methodist camp, because they wanted somebody to be able to answer questions about Judaism, that slowly but surely those experiences, all of the educational experiences and then the interfaith experiences, led me to the rabbinate. There's no question.
So, okay, so from one day did anybody, your parents or anybody that just come out of the blue and say, how you should become a rabbi or think about become a rabbi, or how did this?
Nobody. No, it was definitely a kind of a aggregate experience.
Did God call you?
Pardon?
Did God call you? Did you get a calling from God?
Not only didn't I get a calling from a God idea, but I've never believed personally in a supernatural God concept. I think of God as a process, more of a way of a label, if you want to use that term, which is a rather crude term, but a way of describing a connotative series of values. It's not a God idea that listens to prayer or informs history or is omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent. That's not a God. That's not a God concept that resonates with me. However, that certainly is a God concept that resonates with most people who use the word religious, which unfortunately is used incorrectly in my estimation.
So what is it that, okay, so let's go back to why you what was it that, was it like a gradual thinking, somehow the idea of
it was the working with young children, it was writing, it was teaching about Jewish values at a Methodist camp, not for the whole summer, but for a nice block of time. It was serving on panel discussions with the National Conference of Christians and Jews. And the ADL ran similar kinds of programs where they brought together spokespersons from different religious traditions and uh, and young people from different religious traditions, and I participated in a lot of that and
So,
loved it very much. And so when I put it all together, all those experiences that I was having, uh, I suppose at one at some point in my life there was an elderly rabbi emeritus at the progressive congregation in Oak Park, Illinois. It's called Oak Park Temple, where I was the youth director. And this elderly rabbi, his name was Sam Schwartz. And Sam Schwartz and I would spend time chatting together, and I just loved him as a human being. He was just a wonderful, wonderful human being. But we really didn't talk. We really didn't talk about the rabbinate. But I definitely am conscious of the fact that I was able to say to myself, I would like to be like Sam Schwartz. I mean, there's no question that he was. He imaged for me what the rabbinate was. Now, whether or not that, I was inventing that image in him or not, I can't say. But he certainly helped me coalesce all my experiences of public speaking and panels and interfaith activity and working with people with special needs. And after all of that, I put all those pieces together. I said to myself, you know what, Bogot, why don't you become a rabbi?
So the rabbi is now coming into this field with this big instinct to educate. And when you get out of, when you become a rabbi, this is really what you devote your career to. And you become a really big deal in, as I understand it, in the Jewish, at least the Reform Jewish movement, in terms of kind of running education. Is that a fair assessment?
No, I don't think I became a big deal, but I became respected for putting together a curriculum that actually turned out to be too complicated for the average synagogue to use. It was called To See the World Through Jewish Eyes, because I came up with this concept that let's see how best to describe it. That when you smell bread, you think challah, and challah is a twisted loaf of sometimes with a lot of egg in it, and it's shiny and brown. I don't have anything to show you, but it's a traditional bread, probably started out from the European experience, because you can buy a bread that looks like that in a German bakery. But nevertheless, the whole concept that you can see the world through Jewish eyes, if you think about the values and you think about the holidays and you allow the holidays to become personifications in the way in which you're going to live your life, then for me, that made a lot of sense. And so I wrote a curriculum to try to develop that whole concept. It demanded a kind of abstract thinking on the part of both the educators and the young people that were studying, but it turned out to be recognized internationally as a very, very unique curriculum, one of the most, I guess, inventive by Tel Aviv University. That was a long time ago.
So tell us, since this is still something you're kind of doing, which is trying to get people to see the world from Jewish eyes, or from the Jewish, not from the perspective of a Jewish God, because you don't believe in that kind of concept of a God that can answer our prayers or listens to our prayers, but you think that Judaism has something unique to offer to the world. So let me turn the question into, what are the key things about Jewish eyes that you would, talked about that in your talk about today, because I know you're still teaching at a tender age of like 84, right? And
And I'm going to be 86.
86, okay, well, you're getting younger looking. And then, but you're teaching to kids from every different culture uh, in a community college in outside of Philadelphia, and they're meeting, I guess, by Zoom remotely, and you're interacting with kids from literally every corner of the world who are taking a course about Jewish eyes, about Judaism. And so I have questions about kind of what that means, but also I want to talk to you, hear your thoughts about how these Jewish eyes view the current world, and which is a bigger challenge because we have so much going on, and whether maybe there's any real progress going on, whether uh, you know we should be. We have so many young people who are so depressed about climate change and the nature of our governmental institutions. We have uh, octogenarian who's running for president against another one who's a criminal, from what I can tell. When everybody, I think anybody reasonable can tell, 91 indictments. This is a very different world than I grew up with. But of course, the world that you grew up with when you were a kid was Nazi Germany, but not directly, but indirectly. Uh, so I wonder if there's any progress in this entire, from the Jewish eyes perspective. But let's talk about the Jewish eyes. What do you convey about that to your current class and and all your work before that?
Well, it's a magnificent question, uh, but it's one that I can't answer without looking at some examples, and I think I can find you some examples uh, that will answer your question in a meaningful way. Now, let me just get to it.
While you're looking, I want to just mention one thing about a podcast we had a few weeks back with Robert Pinsky, who's
Yeah, I listened to it.
the three-time poet laureate, and he just put on this fantastic poetry reading. We actually literally last night in actually Saturday night in Boston at Boston University, where with six of the top musicians, jazz musicians in the world. They were each better than the next, and he's speaking his poetry, and they're playing along with his speaking. But this idea that you mentioned about poetry as rhyme, the children uh, when they're first, when you first talk to them, you talk to them in rhyme because that somehow connects with their uh, processing. This is exactly what he said in his uh, podcast to me right at the beginning, because I asked him what about poetry, how does he think about poetry, and he said he views it as an art form, and it's one that we all learn when we're children, but that we then forget. Uh, and I thought just that you are in your own way have become a poet because a lot of what you're writing, your 20 books, you said are in rhyme.
Well,
So
I mean, uh, let me give you an example of. Let me give you an example of how I think rhyming helps children deal with complicated topics. I mean, I didn't I didn't know that the author Pinsky was going to talk that way. Uh, But for instance, this book about repairing the world, when buses filled with clapping hands travel to and fro on rainbow highways in the sky, and tears roll wet and salty from joy-filled eyes that once saw only sadness. When love is everywhere, a hug, a kiss, a handshake, a smile, a gentle touch. When dreams become workers working, hungry tummies fed, and happy children feeling sometimes scared, surprised, and angry, but always safe. This book and its illustrations take this whole concept of tikkun olam in Hebrew, which means repairing the world, puts it into rhyme, along with illustrations of a hermit crab who's learning that he can help repair the world in a kind of metaphoric sense. But the sample of the rhyme that I just shared with you is an example of how these books that I had the privilege to be part of and inspire and author or co-author in some instances would create a Hebrew value like repairing the world, so that when I teach at Penn State Abington, which is, right around the corner from Rydell Park where I live, which is a life care community, I can read that book. Now, goes all the way back to what I said, why I wanted to start my education in early childhood and get my first degree in early childhood. It gets proven every time that I read that. I want to teach them the value of tikkun olam, repairing the world, to someone from Bangladesh, from someone from Uganda. By the way, most of the people that I'm teaching are on campus. They're not in their home countries. That was during the pandemic. The Asian young people, especially those from China, I did teach them, and when they were living in China. In other words, they went back to China during the pandemic. But all of my students, no matter where their birth culture is, are in the area. There's a few in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and other campuses. Penn State University has many satellite campuses. And because I'm teaching remotely and online, no matter what campus they're on, they can take the course in Jewish studies. To get back to the poetry. So I can take that poetry written for 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, maybe 10, 11-year-olds when I'm thinking about writing it. And I can read that to a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old from a different country or from the suburbs of Philadelphia, and they can finally understand what tikkun olam, repairing the world as a Jewish value, is all about. So there you're taking early childhood methodology, taking what, I don't know his first name, Robert Pinsky? No.
Yeah, Robert, right.
Robert, what he said about poetry and what you repeated so beautifully, and be using it to teach a Jewish value. So you can see the world through Jewish eyes, because the poetry gives you the lenses. It gives you the lenses to see a complex concept like repairing the world. And God knows we need to repair the world, whether it's environmental, whether it's interpersonal, whether it's caring for animal life, all the different concerns that exist. That's an example of how all the blending took place within my own becoming who I am today. It all started with that early childhood experience, and then it just kind of morphed its way along. But the poetry stayed in rhyme, and it stayed for young children, but with adult ideas.
So would you say that repairing the world, when you look, when you say I'm going to look at the world or teach the world in terms of teach the world about the views from Jewish eyes, are you saying that this is one of a variety of core, uh, you know,
Yeah, that's a core value for
core
sure.
value, core value, but these core values you can trace back to the Bible. You can trace back thousands of years.
They're not all biblical. The core values uh, are not all biblical. Some of them are Talmudic, which takes us back only about 2,000 years, or a little bit more than 2,000 years. Some of them are biblical. Some of them are Talmudic. But you asked the question, and I finally found what I was looking for on how what's it like when you present to someone who has a totally different birth culture, who never took a course in Jewish studies in his or her life, who probably never had much interaction with the Jewish community, certainly did not know what a rabbi was, and calls the synagogue a church. Okay, here's an example. One of the values, and because the semester has just begun for at Penn State, and I think probably true at Boston University as well. It's began late in August, the semester. Um, and one of the Jewish values that I taught was, it's a long Hebrew phrase, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, which translates as, each Jew is a guarantor for every Jew. And I put in parentheses that the general meaning of that is the importance of mutual support. So I asked the students to think about the way in which that Jewish value of mutual support has impacted their life in terms of their own birth culture. So I'll just read you a little bit of what somebody wrote. I grew up in Bangladesh. This is a perfect example of what goes on in my classroom. I can't tell you how privileged I am to be part of that. I grew up in Bangladesh and am a follower of Islam. Since my childhood, I learned that the importance of activism and mutual support. There is the Jewish value. I learned to take care of our neighbors by making sure that they are not struggling. If they are struggling, we help them to solve their problems. If we cook a good meal, we usually share those with our neighbors. In Bangladesh, religion plays a very vital role in our traditions and culture. Islam also emphasizes the importance of activism and mutual support. And the next is a person from Haiti. And after the person from Haiti is someone from Greece. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. But you can see that it's definitely, there's a kind of universalism. You start with a particularism. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. So it's Hebrew. I ask them to say words with me so they can hear another language in their ears. I'll ask them to sometimes tell me, use their birth language to say the same thing. Once we get through with what I call the mechanics of the differences, we then focus in on the core value. The core value is people helping other people, people supporting other people, one person being a guarantor for another person. It's very much like the highest level of tzedakah, which is poorly translated as charity in English. Tzedakah in Hebrew actually means helping a person fulfill her or his potential, getting them a job, making sure that they can have self-esteem and self-reliance. Okay, you can see that this young man, I think it's young man, I'm not sure anymore, because I don't put their names. I want them to always feel safe that if I'm going to read something that they wrote, that they have their privacy and their integrity protected. He's, from Bangladesh. He's a Muslim, and he's taken a Jewish value, used it as a lens to look at his birth culture. And my hope is that the Jewish value lens is helping him strengthen his own value about mutual support, but from the standpoint of his Islamic religious culture and his Bangladesh birth culture.
So this raises the question of, is there a kind of a commonality across all these different cultural groups that you're finding, or since you're teaching a course on Jewish eyes and Jewish views and Jewish values, you must think that these are things that people don't know or haven't looked at, or that Judaism has a particular lens for looking at them that you're not going to get from Islam, but Islam would have lenses that we wouldn't get from looking at it from Judaism's perspective.
Larry, I think the answer is that there's more similitude, which is a kind of Robert Frost term. There's more similitude than we normally talk about. The truth of the matter is that let's take this concept of mutual support. It's a universal. The question is how do you, at least for me as an educator, how do I take a particularism that I love dearly, that I'm very committed to, that I may be able to express with Hebrew words and English words? How do I help take that particularism and move it into the realm of a universally embraced concept? Because if I can do that successfully, then I have this Chinese young man who comes up to me when I was teaching on campus before the pandemic. And he said to me, "Oh, Rabbi Bogot, I did something Kedusha today." Now he's talking to me in English. His language is Asian. His birth culture is Asian. But he took the word Kedusha, which means uniqueness. It's poorly translated as holy in prayer books all over the place, but it doesn't mean holy, it means unique. And he integrates it into his own way, since language is a way to express your own feelings and your own perception of self and the world around you. And now he's got a word that he never had before. And he's able to walk up to me and say, "I did something Kedusha today." Well, now if that's not a winner, I don't know what else. I don't know what winning is if that's not it. Does it ultimately move the particular of any religious system and move it toward some universal embrace with just simply different vocabulary, but everybody then begins to understand that it all means the same thing, caring for other people? Yeah, it means that. Does it happen, quickly? No, it doesn't happen quickly. It's not until the end of the semester that the majority of my students are able to use Hebrew value words and Hebrew value ideas in the way in which that young man did that day. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time.
But your emphasis, if this Chinese kid had taken a course similar course on Islam, about Islamic views. Would I'm trying to get at the value added of the Jewish perspective, not to denigrate or suggest there's no value added from other perspectives, but I'm trying to. You chose to become a rabbi, not an imam, and you haven't converted. So in 86 years. So you must feel like there's something that's been lost along the way that needs to be retaught, and something that Judaism emphasizes that other cultural views may not, or maybe you just think that it just needs to be reemphasized, that especially in this day and age when people don't see any commonality even across the street with their neighbors, let alone across countries.
Well, no, you've put it very well. Uh, Actually, last night I was teaching a small group here at Rydell Park, and I had occasion to say to them, you have to understand, you don't have to understand, but I'd like you to understand that it's from my perspective, being ethical equals being religious. They're synonyms. That ethics and religion and being religious and being ethical mean the same thing. And there was, I would say, there was, kind of not amazement, but around the table, very well educated, all Jewish residents of this life care community heard me say something, and they said, "We've never heard a rabbi say that before." Religion means that you're observing rules of keeping kosher and all kinds of ritual differences. And I said, that's ritual. That's not what the word religious means. In Judaism, the word religious means being ethical. I said, you can't say that a person who goes to services 3 times a day but owns slum property is religious. It's a contradiction in terms. It's absurd to say that. I told them that I once wanted to invent one of those things outside of a synagogue or any kind of a Jewish organization that was like in an airport, where you have to go through, and if you have metal in your pocket, it's going to ring a bell. That if somebody who was unethical tried to come in to do services and say a prayer, that's fine. Prayers are wonderful for people who want to have conversational theism in their life. Prayers are also wonderful if they see prayer as a way to talk to their neighbor and help their neighbor think about an idea. That collectivism is beautiful. But if they don't happen to be an ethical person and they're trying to get into the synagogue to do that, the door slams in their face and doesn't let them through. I've never found anyone that wanted to invest in this particular product that I've just suggested to you or to anybody that's listening to this podcast. But I believe in it very seriously. That
So I think what we're hearing is that, um, you know, you may not be saying things that are brand new beyond what people have said over the last 1,000 years in our culture or other cultures, but you are saying things in ways that reinterpret and emphasize and can make connections that everybody who comes along and teaches kind of does it their own way.
can you stop the tape for a minute?
Sure can. Yep. And we're back.
Yeah,
The-
but I need to kind of clarify. This is not. It's not that it's complicated to talk about it, but there's a lot of pieces to it. Let me take an example. I'm certainly not opposed to ritual. I'm certainly not opposed to someone for whom the beauty of their religious commitment, and let's take Judaism as an example, is very, very important to them. I brought a shofar with me. I should have brought it and could blow it during the podcast. And I blew it for everybody.
because
But
it's
I
the
said to,
Jewish New Year.
what?
Explain what a shofar is and what the.
Well, I have to go get it.
Okay, go get it.
I'll get it.
Maybe you can blow it. That'd be great.
First of all, there is what I would call a myth or a fairy tale or a legend in the book of Genesis, the first of the 5 books of Moses, the beginning of the Hebrew Bible. And in its 22nd chapter is this story that a number of people would recognize, of God telling Abraham to take his son Isaac to the mountain and sacrifice Isaac to demonstrate his loyalty. It's a charade. There's no question about it. From a literary standpoint, it's a charade. Nothing was ever going to happen. And instead, a ram was sacrificed. We're talking primitive religion and primitive religious thought. And so comes the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, which is right around the corner on our calendar.
The Jewish New Year.
That's right. The Jewish New Year, the beginning of, and instead of there being a human sacrifice, which in primitive cultures, there's no question that there's evidence of in certain tribes, a ram was sacrificed. And so on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which is also a lousy translation because the word Shana, Rosh Hashanah, actually means a time for change. And so I'll comment about that in a minute. You blow the shofar. Not bad for an old man.
Oh, very good. Excellent.
But I want to say something about ritual. If you celebrate, I mean, there are beautiful rituals around Rosh Hashanah as a new year. You dip apples in honey for a sweet new year. The whole concept of Rosh Hashanah is that it's in the prayer book, it's called Hayom Harat Olam, which is translated as today is the birthday of the world. And I say to my students, adult students, who may never have heard anyone say that Rosh Hashanah is traditionally thought of in the prayer book as the birthday of the world, that if after they celebrate that holiday, they haven't gotten any more mature, then it was a useless celebration. If the ritual doesn't become a guideline for improved through the process of personification. If a ritual doesn't nurture maturity, a greater love for freedom, a greater respect for diversity, a greater respect for inclusion. I mean, I could go on and on and on. As far as I'm concerned, it's just an empty, it's an empty ritual. It's just, it's like, okay, my mother did it, my father did it, my grandparents, uh, said this prayer over wine, dipped apples in honey, but it didn't change the people. If the ritual doesn't change the person to become more in tune with the values of the holiday, the birthday of the world, that's a magnificent concept.
So
the world needs to grow up, but so does every person. I used to call that synectic thinking. I'm not sure if I'm using the term correctly or not, but it's certainly metaphoric thinking.
Well, we've talked almost an hour, Howie. I was struck by you referencing Robert Frost. Pinsky started his podcast with me quoting a poem about money by Robert Frost, and he's just written a book called Jersey Breaks about his history, his biography, autobiography, growing up in a Jewish Orthodox family of gangsters. Actually, there were bootleggers in the family on the shores of New Jersey, and how he kind of, I haven't read through the whole thing, but it's a story of his transformation into becoming a poet, finding his path. You found your path through time. I think everybody ultimately gets to where they are going to go, and that there's something in the idea of knowing that other people don't know who have succeeded, getting to where they were supposed to go, but not knowing how to get there, but by trying and getting there. And you're, from what I knew back when I was 8 years old, sitting in your apartment in Cherry Hill after summer camp in the fall and winter, talking to you, you're bringing something to the world. You're still bringing it. You're passing the torch, but it's not a torch that's just the same torch. It's got a different light every time you turn it. Every time you light it up, you're passing on something novel. It's kind of an evolution of thinking about what it is that's going on through time with this religion, what it's really here for, what religion in general is here for, and what Howie Bogot is here for. And I would say you're here to do a lot of good, and you've done a lot of good, but you're also shaking people up and getting them to think and getting them to realize that repeating the same things is not the same as doing something important and new and useful. So any parting words, or should we call it an afternoon and agree to do this again shortly?
Well, I guess the parting words would be to simply hope that this podcast begins to open up this agenda in which religion is not something that separates people, but brings people together on the level of shared values. And if we can accomplish that through what was kind of a rambling conversation that you nurtured in this podcast, we can be very proud that we've taken a step in the right direction. But to make the diversity inclusive with values being the common denominator, no matter how they're expressed by someone from Bangladesh or somebody from Oak Park, Illinois, uh, that ain't easy.
Right.
It ain't easy because there's a tribalism. Václav Havel, when he was getting the award at Constitution Hall in Philadelphia, I remember reading him saying that there was no unity principle anymore because in globalism, everyone was scared by globalism and technology, and they were running back into their tribal safe zones. And I remember responding to that, not to him, but responding to that by writing a little essay a long time ago about the fact that the unity principle are values that are shared, whether it's the Bangladesh student or the I did something Kedusha today, Rabbi. That's the beginning of the tribalism coming together as, the global village. And I really believe that it's possible, but it's hard work, and there's lots of opposition to it. And in our country today, uh, we have a political trend that seems to be working the opposite direction. It's pushing into it's pushing tribalism rather than inclusive democracy, and it's a traumatic and tragic thing to be dealing with. And hopefully, my students and the young people in your family will make things better.
Yeah. Well, I'm confident that they will. I think that as difficult as times are, the world and our country is going through even tougher times, and these kind of core values, um, going from the ritual to the practical, would be one quick reference to or description of what you're telling us uh, uh, has happened, and let's keep all pushing in that direction. So,
Are you going to tell your listeners, or how do people, if people want to tune in uh, to our conversation today, how do they do that?
oh, well, I send out an email to, we have about 15,000 subscribers.
Okay.
Then there's like Twitter and Facebook. So, and then the podcast will be distributed on Spotify and Apple Podcasts over,
Will you
maybe a while.
will you send this non-techie some information so
Right.
I can say, oh my God, is that what we look like together?
Yeah, I will send you a link to it's going to be posted on YouTube, and it's on our website, my company's website, YouTube website, Economic Security Planning Inc. But I'll send you a link, and let's hope a lot of people listen to this and take away as much as I have, which is more inspiration from Howie Bogot. So thanks again, and all my love, and we
Thank
will
you.
be in touch.
Okay. Love you.
Shalom.
Bye bye.